but it didn't originally show it as a proper update. But now that it's given the error, it does show up under updates on the control panel as a potential update. So we're going to install that update. So we download and install the update on that server, and we rerun the cluster test again. There it is, the patch that we're installing, and it's required to restart. So I restarted it, and later on here I reran it, the validation, and it failed for a different server with that patch. So I had to install that one and reboot it as well. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm rerunning the test, SQL Server 4, and as soon as I select SQL Server 4, it'll select SQL Server 5 and SQL Server 6. When add, actually, it doesn't manually. You had to manually type that in. There was a little glitch in the video there. So we're running all the tests. We run the cluster validation tool again. This time we hope to get it working, but this is going to fail again because there's a missing update on a second server which didn't show up. It's very peculiar that it doesn't show up when you run it the first time, but it doesn't. So we went through and checked all 3 servers for that patch, and 2 out of 3 were in fact missing the patch. So we installed that on the remaining 2 servers, and we rebooted. Here we're installing, and we're revalidating the cluster. We selected all 3 servers there of the cluster, 4, 5, and 6, and we're revalidating the cluster. As you can see, there's a storage warning. Updates was successful. We ran the validation tool for the 4th time, and only 1 warning remains. It's safe to ignore. This warning, if I showed it here, is with storage. This has to do with valid SCSI ID vital project data. This is the error that is being fixed by Ross right now, and we thank Ross for that work. It's missing a worldwide name and on the disk and through iSCSI, and that's why it generates that warning. It's done differently in open source clusters, so this is unique to Microsoft clusters that has that problem. Now we're selecting the SQL servers, and here we go, just a moment here. Alright, now we're giving it a cluster name. This is actually doing the cluster install. So I call it SQL cluster. Is the cluster 2 is the name, since I already have a SQL cluster 1. And I'm assigning an IP address that's on the same subnet as the 10.10.10 network. I'm giving it a 53 address and going through and running it with that. And it's going to go through. We're speeding up the video here so that it goes a little faster. To install the cluster, it's now forming the cluster. Installing Microsoft Cluster Server Cluster Part 3 of 3. You can see the details of this at wanfuse.blogspot.com for a written document of everything we do here that goes into slightly more detail. Again, as we were showing in the previous video, is installing the SQL cluster now. We're speeding this up so that it doesn't take so long to do, but it shall finish here in just a few minutes. Okay, we've created the cluster, and we're going to view the report and see what errors it gives us, if any, and hopefully we don't see any errors here. As we go down to the bottom there, it says the cluster was successfully created, finishing cluster creation. So we're all set. The cluster was created. The last thing we're going to do is install the distributed transaction coordinator service, which is not required, but is often used in conjunction with SQL Server. And we're configuring application, and next, and distributed transaction coordinator is selected, and click on next. We're going to give this name of SQL cluster DTC, which is the default, and it's going to be on the 10.10.10 network, and it's going to give you the address of 54, which is the next one in series. I try to keep things straight in the DHCP ranges. Here we're selecting the cluster disk. There's one cluster disk required for this service alone. These cluster disks, which are done through iSCSI, as we showed earlier in the previous video, and I believe it was video 1, are only 10 gig apiece, which is more than sufficient for my needs here. And we're going to click on Finish. You could have clicked on View Report, but I know that it's running, so I didn't do that. As you can see, online is pending, and there it is. The MSDTC SQL cluster service is running. Now we can move on to installing SQL Server into the cluster. Okay. Alright. Now this brings us to a bug which is in Proxmox 2.0 because it is still in beta, which is very annoying. It does not acknowledge the change of the ISO files in the CD-ROM. So the workaround for that is to actually create a second VM, a fourth VM with just Windows 7 installed, and mounting the ISO, and you'll need a reboot, but just uninstalling the CD-ROM and reinstalling the CD-ROM with the right ISO in that virtual machine and accessing it over the network. It's a pain, but it's necessary. It does, because it doesn't acknowledge it. I've filed a bug report, and I'm waiting to hear back on that. There we are. We go to a share, and we install it. It takes a little bit longer because it's going over the network to bring the files down, but it is a virtualized network, so it's not that bad. Again, here I'm describing the bug in version Proxmox 2.0 beta, which leaves you unable to swap CD-ROM images in CD-ROM. The workaround is sloppy. There's no question about it, but it does work, and it doesn't cause any downtime with the actual service by doing that. Again, here we're just describing that we're going to build the server with Windows 7 installed that can be shut down and reboot freely. Mount the CD-ROM as a VMware share so you can access it through the VM that you're working on over the network. If you can't ping the servers, then you can't access the share. So you got to make sure that the firewall is open enough to be able to do that. Here we're selecting the remote CD-ROM, and we're running setup. The SQL Server installation starts, and that's going to take a few moments. And we're going to go to planning and server configuration checker and run that configuration checker to make sure that it runs. As we can see here, we passed 15, failed 3 with warnings, warning 0. And we're actually going through and we're running that because those failures were not relevant. Sorry, there was 0 failures. Apologize. Okay, now we're selecting the Euler agreement, and the warning generated because of our SQL was due to the SQL implementation. That's why we ignored them. I did that off the camera as I investigated that, so that's why I blinked by those errors. It's safe to ignore for now. The implementation of iSCSI through KVM and Proxmox, ZFS, and iSCSI is the fixes in the works for that problem. And I thank Ross for again for working so hard on that for me.